Hello, my name's Dr. P. Dominique Paterano, PhD, founder and president of Crimson Coaching, which provides academic tutoring, test prep, and college counseling to students worldwide. This talk is called Note Taking and Studying Effectively, and it is a workshop intended for students age 12 through adult. So just a little bit of background about who I am. As I mentioned, I'm not only the founder and president of Crimson Coaching, but I'm also the head coach. I used to be a high school teacher, and during that time, I became really familiar with how especially high school students work and learn. And that is the basis for this talk. Sometimes people ask me, why did you name your company Crimson Coaching? And as you might be able to see from the diploma and photograph mats behind me, they are from Harvard, which is my alma mater, and the color of Harvard is crimson. And what I do is coach students to achieve their highest potential. And so I named my company Crimson Coaching. And I developed this talk to do precisely that, to help students develop their potential. Because as a high school teacher, I used to notice very often that some students or many students who got what they considered poor grades didn't get poor grades because they were less smart than students who got good grades. It's because they often lacked fundamental skills of note taking and studying. And so this talk is an attempt to remedy that. Before we go on, I would just like, however, to thank you for tuning in. I know that since the start of the pandemic, there have been many educational webinars, and so I really appreciate you watching this one. As a historian, the doctor in Dr. P is for my doctorate in history. I like to be really transparent about what my sources are. So I'll be honest, I mean, some of them came from me as a college student or a high school student. This is where I happen to live at Harvard. It's Dunster House. It's got that typical crimson dome that you may see in many of the photographs of the university. And they worked particularly effectively for me, so I thought I'd share them. But of course, most of my sources do come from my professional life. I started my career teaching in 1997 at the Great Neck North High School in New York, which is here. And I finished it up at Scarsdale High School in Westchester, New York. In between, I did teach for 5 years at Horace Mann School, an independent day school in Riverdale in New York City. And during that time, I taught all grades of high school, but the one that I taught most was ninth grade. And it was really in the context of teaching freshmen in high school where I got really sort of passionate and almost like a zealot in teaching the skills that students need to survive in high school and college. I began to do that more one-on-one, however, when I began Crimson Coaching in 2014. I taught for a number of years small group classes in Mamaroneck in Westchester, New York, and also I began to teach these skills one-on-one to private clients. But as a lifetime learner and a little bit of a self-professed geek, I will admit that I love to keep abreast of the latest research as well. And one of my favorite podcasts is from this man, Andrew Huberman, who is a professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford School of Medicine. And I have learned so much from his podcast about not only how my brain works, but how I can help students. And so I do highly recommend listening to his podcast, but especially good episodes are to watch if you can't watch all 90 something of them that he's put out so far. I think definitely tune in to the very beginning ones on sleep, his interview with Matt Walker on sleep, because I do believe, and I think like him, that without sleep your brain really can't function at its optimal level, as well as his interview with Dr. Anna Lemke on discussing dopamine and motivation, because as we'll be discussing in the part of this talk on studying, many students at least tell me that they lack the motivation to study. So we'll talk about how to increase that motivation a little bit. So if this were a live workshop, I would ask you how you take notes now. And when I've done that, many students say, I copy down what the teacher writes on the board, or I don't take notes at all, or I type into my computer every single thing that the teacher is saying. And while none of those things are particularly bad, although then not doing anything at all is probably not great, I would just like to say that many studies have shown that students who write things down with a pen or a pencil and paper versus typing, they remember what they write down much more than students who type. And I know that students say, well, I can't get everything down, and I'm just going to click ahead to this. The thing is that when you are figuring out what should I write and what can I not write because my hand can't move that quickly, that is the first step of your mind evaluating what is important and what's not. And so you are forcing your brain, when you take notes by hand, to evaluate the information that you are learning. Therefore, that is much better, say, than in class just typing furiously like a human recorder when your brain is not really engaged at all. Okay. The same thing applies to reading. This quote from the New York Times: students who think they read better or more efficiently on the screen will still do better on the test if they have read the passage on the page. And college students who print out articles, this author said, tend to have higher grades and better test scores. I also serve as an adjunct professor of history at the City University of New York. And since the pandemic, I have taught exclusively online. And I always recommend that my students do print out the articles that I send them via the learning management system, because it is so important to be able to interact with that material, to annotate it, maybe to highlight it. And so all of the note taking that I'm going to be discussing today will be I will presume that you are taking those notes by hand, and I recommend, in fact, that you do so. I do not recommend, however, that you have lots of distractions in your background. I know that many students think that they learn better with music. If your environment is too noisy and you feel like you need some sort of white noise, that's okay. Or if you have a pair of headphones and you'd even like to listen to binaural beats, okay. But beyond that, anything with like a big melody or with lyrics will distract you. So try to have as distraction-free an environment while you're reading and taking notes and while you're studying. So the method of note-taking that I'm going to share with you was developed by a professor at Cornell University in the 1950s. Hence, it's called the Cornell method of note-taking. And it is great for my discipline, history, as well as for many of the social sciences like psychology and economics. But I'm going to show you how you can also modify this note-taking method for other subjects as well. I will admit it's the least useful for math and math-dependent science courses, although I will suggest a way that you might even be able to use it for math as well. I wholeheartedly recommend to get comfortable with this note-taking method while you are reading at home, when you can control the pace of the information that you're taking notes on. I also recommend reading that information through one time without taking notes so that you can understand what you're reading and then take notes during the second pass. It's sort of like if a friend asked you to tell them the main points of your favorite movie, you'd be able to do that much better than a movie that and that you've never seen before. If you're watching a movie for the first time, you might not know what's important and what's not important in the plot or the characters. So try to do the same thing when you're reading for school. Read through once and then take notes. Once you've gotten really good at this note-taking method, maybe for 3, 4, 5 months, then you can take it into the classroom with you, because obviously you can't pause a professor or teacher and ask them to rewind what they just talked. So you need to be really proficient at this method if you're going to use it in class itself. So in order to start, you are going to draw a T with the line. If you have a notebook, I'm getting one here, and you know that a notebook always sort of has that blue line up here. You're going to use that blue line up here, and then you could either fold or draw a line about an inch to the right of that pink margin line. Then you should write the title of what you're reading, the subject in class, and then the date above the T. And I recommend in my Getting Organized workshop that students use just a one subject notebook for every subject that they have. But I'm a realist, and I know that when I would check my ninth graders' homework, I would always see algebra or biology notes next to it. So I do recommend writing what class it's for, and then also the date, because if your teacher says you are going to have a test on, say it's October 1st, and he tells you we're going to have a test on everything from September 15th to October 1st, you can then go and access, and then you won't bother studying what you learned in the first half of September. So step 3 is you're going to take notes in the biggest part of the page, this 2/3 on the right-hand side here, on the details of the reading here. And I encourage you to use bullets, different colors to make things stand out, main ideas stand out. Use abbreviations that you understand. You might want to underline important words or concepts, indent supporting details, and stop when you reach the bottom of the page. Okay, and as you see, I modeled for students what they might do on that previous step, right? So this was called the British Empire in the New World. I used a couple of abbreviations, and then I also used the date there. Down here, and I'm sorry that this says step 5 because this is actually step 4. On the lower left-hand corner of the page, you want to list any questions that you still might have while you're reading or listening if you're watching a video. I do recommend skipping a couple of lines in between your questions. And if it's a who, what, when, where question, feel free to look that up on Wikipedia. A why or a how question, you might need to follow up with your teacher. And don't think that you're bothering your teacher. Teachers love it when students can and do bring in their questions from reading, because it shows the teacher that you care about a subject that they care very much about. And you'll see, by the way, here in this part, how I underlined a term like mercantilism and then used bullets in order to put down 2 terms that are important to that. I capitalized the word tobacco because that was very important to the founding of Jamestown, Virginia. And then lastly, your very last step is going to be to write a synthesis, kind of bringing together all of the notes on the page and your answers to all of the questions. This is the only thing that I recommend doing in a full sentence. And the reason why is it would be very easy to merely copy the title. And the title is a phrase, British Empire in the New World, but it doesn't show cause effect or doesn't show really anything about the relationship between the ideas in this chapter. And I will tell you right now, it is by far the hardest part of this whole exercise to write a full sentence, but it does get easier, like everything, with practice. I also will tell you that I've had students ask me in classes, how can I have time to take Cornell method notes and answer the questions in the back of the textbook, or that whatever questions my teacher requires me to hand in as proof that I did the homework assignment? And I say fair enough, because I know that students these days are incredibly busy with extracurriculars and often with heavy workloads. So what I do recommend is that for yourself, you do just one thing on this page, and that is the hardest thing. That is writing the synthesis of what this chapter was about. And I don't recommend copying down the little summary sentence that the textbook has, because if you merely copy, you're not trying to piece together the relationship of the ideas that you read. So please do that for yourself. And if you do that every night, you will get better at it. So let's look at how we can do this, because obviously, although history is the most important subject, it's not the only one, right? So let's look at how we might modify this for English. Well, I recommend that you keep the T structure, but maybe you'd like to have a separate T structure page, one for chapter and plot summary, another for characters and development, another for setting, another for language and stylistic devices, another perhaps for theme. And I recommend that you keep track, perhaps in the skinny part of the page, on what chapter or act and scene number or page number you are getting your information from. Because when you go back and have to write a paper or study for a test, you will be glad that you have that information ready and you don't have to page through a 300-page book to find it. So how might you do this for science? Again, you want to keep that T structure. Remember to also read the chapter all the way through first. And in biology, biology is very dependent on understanding terms, so I recommend it for that. For chemistry, you might have terms and equations as well as physics. And I do recommend putting the main idea of a chapter into your own words. Many people might think that math is the most difficult subject to do this for, but I'd like to illustrate I happen to be an SAT tutor too, so I'm not just a history geek. So I do know some math, and I'd like to illustrate what you might do if you're learning, for example, the Pythagorean theorem, right? We have a right triangle. The hypotenuse, or the side opposite the right angle, is side C, and then the shorter legs are A and B. And many students, when I'm tutoring them for the SAT, will know A squared plus B squared equals C squared. But if I ask them what that means, they're often unable to tell me. So how about writing in your summary or synthesis part for the day you learn about the Pythagorean theorem? The square of the length of the hypotenuse, the longest side of a right triangle, is equal to the sum of the square of the two shorter sides. That's what it is, okay? So many students these days get digital notes from the teacher or elsewhere. You know, the teacher might share a packet or slides with you on Google Classroom. So what should you be doing with them? Well, I think it is very important that you integrate the teacher's digital handouts or notes into your own written notes from the reading. It's very important to have a single repository of all your learning on a single subject. And it should not just be digital. So if your teacher gave you notes, try to crystallize them. Then every night you are going to review and transform both the digital notes from the teacher from that day, as well as last night's reading. And you're going to make index cards for them before you read tonight's assignment. And the reason why you want to do this is twofold. First of all, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, you need to have repeated interactions with a subject in order to remember that material. Secondly, activating your prior knowledge about a subject is going to help you better remember what you read that night. So it's sort of like, imagine this is your brain, right? And you activate some prior learning here. This is your prior learning. And then along comes a new piece of information. It's got something to clip onto. But if that prior knowledge is not integrated, that little piece of learning can come along and say, hey, where do I hook on? I don't have anywhere to hook on to. And so bloop, it just went out my ear. Okay. So doing this will help you not only remember last night's work, but it'll also help you better understand tonight's work. I do recommend in those index cards to include less information than you had in your notes. You shouldn't just be rewriting your notes. Again, you never want to merely rewrite, record, right? You always want to be sifting, have your brain turned on and think, what's really the most important thing that I have to learn about this little fact here, about this idea, and crystallize that into its most essential form? So, for example, if we had this British Empire in the New World notes, and on the front of the card, I might write, why didn't England colonize North America in the 16th century? Because last night I learned that Spain was colonizing, and to a lesser extent, France were active in colonizing the New World in the 16th century. So why didn't England do that? And then on the back of the card, I might write, religious fighting between English Catholics and Protestants distracted England until the 17th century. Okay, so you will see if you pause this video and look, I don't actually have that anywhere on this page over here, but I'm also trying to think about, well, what might my teacher ask me on a test? I want to think about this. This actually got asked on a question in a workshop I just taught on Saturday. How do I know what I should study? Because sometimes I study the wrong things on a test. And I said, well, one of the best ways, other than asking your teacher for a study guide, which admittedly and unfortunately, not all high school teachers provide students, is looking at their past tests and trying to figure out what kinds of questions did they ask. Are they asking mere definitions like what is mercantilism? If that is the case, then you've got an easy job. All you need to do is memorize the definition. But if they are asking why and how questions, which I hope they are, then you've got to try to look at all of this information and develop why and how questions based on what you've read. So you can see that studying is not just a night before the test activity. Ideally, you've reviewed the reading at least twice before you quote unquote start studying. And I would say actually many more times than that. I don't know why I have at least twice, because let's say it is Wednesday night, right? Before I start my homework for Wednesday night, I am going to read the cards I made Monday night, make cards for what I read Tuesday night, and then read my reading for Wednesday, and then on Thursday, I'll read Monday, Tuesday, make cards for Wednesday, so on and so forth. So if your teacher gives you 2 weeks between tests, well, you may have read that first Monday, 9 times, done those cards 9 times before you get to that test, ideally. I will say that what I'm talking about will probably work very well for history, but you do want to ask you other teachers and even your history teacher for tips on how to best study for his or her discipline. For example, for math, many of this note taking is going to be irrelevant. I think a great way to study for math is try to do problems like the ones you got wrong on that unit. Ask your teacher, where can I find more, let's say, quadratic equation problems? Please, I need more of those if that's what you struggled on, and then do more of those problems. Don't do problems that you got right, because that's kind of a waste of your time. I recommend attending office hours and extra help, even when you think you know the material. Um, Many times other students will ask a question that you never thought of that you can benefit from. And if you are a high school student who's in 9th, 10th, or 11th grade, or even the beginning of 12th, you will also get the added benefit of developing a relationship with some teachers, and you can ask them for a letter of recommendation to college. And if you want to know more about the college application process, please feel free to check out one of my other videos on YouTube, and at the end of this video, I'll be giving you that information. But essentially, you should know the materials so well the night before the test that you shouldn't even have to study the night before the test. That's how well you should know it. So when I was teaching this note-taking and studying workshop over the weekend, one of the students said that one of her biggest obstacles to studying was maintaining concentration and focus during studying bouts. And I think that that is quite common, not just among high school and middle school students, but among college and adult learners as well. Part of the reason, I can say, is the phone and constantly checking, either if you're an adult, email, if you're a student, maybe text or Snapchat or Instagram. And so one big way, I think, could be, if you're able to and you don't absolutely need the internet while you're studying, turn your Wi-Fi off, turn your phone into airplane mode, and just use it as a timekeeper. And, again, if you're interested, you can watch some of my other videos on time and organization, managing your time. But for middle school students, I don't really recommend studying for more than 25 minutes at a time. And when you do take a break, if you were studying at 25 minutes, you need a 5-minute break, because I advocate a 5-to-1 ratio in terms of work to rest. Okay. If you're a middle school student with severe ADD, you might literally be studying 5 minutes and take a 1-minute rest. Okay. Hopefully, though, by the time you're in high school, you're able to study for about 55, especially seniors and juniors, 50 minutes, 10-minute rest. Okay. I also strongly suggest reading the Neural Network newsletter #2. Actually, I also recommend #1, which is on sleep, because again, you need to master your sleep in order for your brain to function properly. But the Huberman Lab has a learning protocol as I believe, its second newsletter, and this is the URL for that. And we don't really have time in this pre-recorded session. I think it would be a little too boring for me to just go through all the steps there, but I do highly recommend every single one of Andrew Huberman's tips there. The only thing that I myself would find very difficult to do would be the micro rests that he advocates there. He advocates randomly about every 2 minutes, pausing for 10 seconds. I think that requires a lot of focus that most of us just don't have. And then I might actually be more focused on the 2 minutes, 10-second rest, 2-minute work, 10-second rest. But otherwise, I think that it's amazing. I can also share with you one of the things that my student, a student told me that's sort of related to his, I think it's the second tip in the newsletter about visually focusing on something for 30 to 60 seconds. A student of mine who had ADHD told me she used to have a bulletin board with all like funky little favorite things behind her computer where she worked. And once she took all those things down and she had a clear visual field that was in front of her, she began to focus a lot better. So if you struggle with concentration, you might want to try that too. And definitely check out Dr. Huberman's Neural Newsletter #2. So lots of times I get asked the question, can I study with other people? And my first response is always know thyself. If you know that you're a person who's very social and that the person that you intend to study with is one of your best friends, that might not be a great match for studying. It might be, however, a better match for you to ask somebody to study with you who you're friendly with, but who is not your best friend. You might be able to get more done that way. I also think that certain subjects or types of activities are better for partners than others. So, for instance, if you are taking foreign language and you need to ask each other vocabulary words or even understand a conversation, that is a great use of a partner because you'll be practicing your listening skills as well as your speaking skills. Partner studying is also great for quizzing factual knowledge. For example, what's the definition of a mitochondria, or what's the quadratic equation formula? Things that you need to memorize, I think, work really well with others. You may even want to think about a tutoring exchange where, let's say, you're very skilled in Spanish, but not so much in math. And you have a friend who's great in math, but struggling in Spanish. When you tutor each other in these subjects, not only will you get the benefit of learning the subject that you're weak in, but you will become even stronger in the subject that you're already strong in. Because believe me, as a teacher for over 25 years, I can tell you that you truly master a subject when you have to teach that subject to someone else. And lastly, like Dr. Huberman, I'm a big advocate of tracking results, right? I'm not a scientist, but I do like students to experiment a little bit with these different study methods. So, maybe for the month of September, you studied alone. Maybe for the month of October, you'd like to study with a partner. Keep track of the quizzes and tests you took and when you studied one way versus another, and that might give you a lot of information about how you should study in the future. Of course, interestingly enough, I actually developed this talk prior to the pandemic, but since the pandemic, there's been even renewed interest in things like Quizlet, Duolingo. I'm just going to say that once again, I'm going to encourage you to keep track of the results. When do you do better, with or without technology? I'll give you an example for both of these particular tools. I'll be honest, my bias is I'm not a huge fan of anything that has students not writing. So Quizlet, in its ability to make study cards through typing, I don't think is great. But I once had a student who I was tutoring in AP Spanish, and this boy's handwriting was atrocious, and he had to learn about 25 new Spanish vocabulary words a day. It was a lot. So I said, Alex, let's have you he was also very disorganized and suffered from ADHD. So I said, let's have you keep track of all your words in Quizlet. So every night you come home, put your words into Quizlet. But then print them out and make cards from them where you're literally writing them out. He wound up not even using the cards as flashcards because he literally couldn't read his own handwriting. And this is especially important with foreign language when you have the diacriticals or things like accents or the enye or, tilde or whatever, the cedilla en français. So you really want to make sure that everything is perfect when you're writing them down. And he actually wasn't able to see that with his own handwriting. However, interestingly enough, even though he didn't use his index cards to study from, he used the Quizlet card, the time he wrote all the vocab words out by hand, he did better on his test. And that is because I believe that hand-brain connection helped Alex to learn those words more efficiently. I have to admit, I love Duolingo. I think it's great, especially because students can hear when they can't be next to their professor. I don't necessarily think it's a substitute for learning in a more traditional way, but I do think it's a great complement to it. So let's look at some conclusions before we finish up. I hope by now you realize that one of my big principles for note-taking and studying is that you've got to find ways to keep your brain engaged, both while you're note-taking and while you're studying. If you're not keeping your brain engaged, and if your eyes are just sort of passively glazing over the page, you're never going to remember what you're quote unquote reading. Second, read, write, repeat. The repetition of learning fell out of favor, great favor in the 1990s, and I think has been a bit poo-pooed in pedagogical circles since then. It was believed that by repeating things, students would get bored, and that might be true. However, that is the way we learn most things, right? When I learned, and you all learned to walk, we had to make multiple mistakes. And by the way, in Dr. Huberman's neural network newsletter, making mistakes and repetitions are two of the different tips he gives. You and I fell down, we tumbled, we stumbled when we were learning to walk. We had to practice walking many times, even when we learned to speak, right? Maybe we first said baba, 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 bottle, and then finally bottle, right? So by making errors, that's how we eventually learn. And by repeating things over and over again, that's also how we learn. Think about Serena Williams and her tennis serve. She's done that probably hundreds of thousands of times, right? I will say that unfortunately, I see this in particular with basic arithmetic. I don't think that students are ever made to, for example, memorize the multiplication tables like students of my own generation were. And that's why I have students at top private schools in New York City, for example, counting on their fingers 6 times 7. And that's extremely worrisome to me because they've been allowed to use calculators since 2nd grade. So, and by the way, the student did 6 times 7 on her fingers and came up with 41. So it's not foolproof either. So we do need to read, write, repeat in all the subjects, including math. Also, ask for help. Whether it's to a classmate for tutoring exchange, a friend to help you quiz words, a parent to go over, um, you know, uh, uh, flashcards with you, or a teacher to ask for better ways to study for his or her discipline. There is help out there. If you feel like you have more serious challenges, like maybe you have ADD or ADHD, ask your guidance counselor or the school psychologist to help you and figure out if that's what's going on, and to get you diagnosed. Basically, there is help out there. There are people who care about you out there. Even some, if you are watching this through a library, then even the librarians the young adult librarians, they can help you too. And finally, keep your eyes on the prize. I took out a little note-taking part, goal writing exercise from the beginning of this, because I knew that this webinar would go a bit long with it. But if you're interested in a goal setting exercise, I have a free download on my website, crimsoncoaching.com, that can take you through a goal setting exercise. And in short, I do recognize that the studying that I'm recommending, the repetition every night, reading those cards, that's going to add about 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how much reading and note-taking you have, onto your nightly homework. And I understand that the Cornell method of note-taking is going to add some time, especially in the beginning when you're learning to master that technique. However, if one of your goals is to get better grades, to remember what you read, or to get into the college of your dreams, I do think that those goals all require time. And it's worth it, because ultimately the 15 to 30 minutes extra a day that you're spending, if you wind up getting into the college of your dreams, it'll be worth it. So to learn more, I would love for you to email me at info@crimsoncoaching.com. I have a little PDF handout for tips on note-taking and studying. If you'd like to sign up for my newsletter that comes out just once a month, I promise, and I won't spam you. I don't share your email with anybody else, and you can always unsubscribe at any time. Basically, my newsletter contains a little article on something about adolescent education or the college planning process. And at the bottom, I have a list of all the talks that I'm giving in that current month. And on the other side, a list of articles that I found really interesting that month related to adolescence and college. And then finally, YouTube. If you subscribe to Crimson Coaching on YouTube, you just go to youtube.com/Crimson Coaching. You can watch lots of other educational videos like these. I have videos on how to write a great application essay, how to make the most out of college tours, whether you should take the SAT, the ACT, or none at all. Lots of different videos like these. And once you subscribe, you will get a notification when a new video is posted. And I will also say I am trying to grow my YouTube channel, and subscribing to the channel is a great way to say thank you for the information that I've provided to you today. Lastly, this is the time, if this were a live talk, I would take questions, but clearly this is pre-recorded, so I don't know what your questions are, but I would be more than happy to answer them via email. You can reach out to me at info@crimsoncoaching.com or via my website, www.crimsoncoaching.com. Once again, I'm Dr. P, president and founder of Crimson Coaching. I thank you for watching this educational video, and I hope you have a great day.